Great. We've got a great session ahead of us today. Welcome everybody who's joining. See the room filling in. We're going to give it a minute, make sure everybody gets their connection going and ready for a great session today that we have from the Avaap team. Very nice, very nice. It was great to see all the interest in the topic as well. We always like doing these and being able to share the information that we have inside our organization and sharing it externally with others. So good afternoon and thank you, everybody who's joined us today. We're glad you're here. Today's webinar is Getting Your ERP Transformation Initiative Right. I'm Melissa Prusher, Vice President of Marketing at Avaap, and have the great pleasure to introduce Avaap Vice Presidents Angelo Mazzocco and Kameron deVente today. I'm sure you're wondering about the bee stings and the snake bites, and since I don't want to scoop our presenters, you'll have to hang on a little bit longer to find out what that has to do with ERP transformation. But I assure you at the end of today's session, you'll know for sure. Both of our speakers bring a wealth of experience in helping organizations achieve transformation from system selection and process redesign to managing change and accelerating user adoption. I'll let them introduce themselves, but before I do, I wanted to cover a few quick housekeeping items. At the bottom of the screen, we've all been on Zoom for a while. There's a Q&A button. Feel free to use it, submit questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. You can also feel free to use the chat as well if you want to drop a comment in now where you're from. That's always fun to see where folks are. I'm saying hi to you from New Jersey. Our team's out in Columbus. There's also a brief survey at the end of today's session. I personally would appreciate your taking the minute to complete it before exiting. And lastly, because everyone wants to know if an on-demand version of today's webinar will be available, the answer is a resounding yes. It'll be on our website in about 2 business days, and everyone who's on the call will also receive an email with the link to view it on demand. And at the end of the session, if you realize you'd like to connect to talk specifically about your organization, we'll put our contact information up on the screen at the end of the presentation. So for now, sit back, get ready to enjoy today's session, and let me welcome Kameron from Avaap.
All right, thanks, Melissa. You can hear me okay, I trust?
Yes, you sound great. On with the show.
So just brief background, Kameron deVente, Vice President with Avaap. I started with Anderson Consulting, which became Accenture, and then I've been with Avaap for the past 16 years. Really out of school, I started with in management consulting. I've been, pretty much consulting in the, enterprise system implementation space in one way, shape, or another for the past 35 years. So I've seen it all from selection to preparation to planning to design to testing to post support, and so really have a kind of a broad and depth of understanding over the years. And as ERP systems have evolved and changed over the years, so I have a good perspective on the what it takes to be successful. I do have a role of executive account owner within Avaap, which means I'm in developing relationships and delivering the best of Avaap for our clients. I've also got chief operating experience with Avaap as well, and I've been involved with multiple software selections and implementations. I've got some certifications in project management and pro-side change management. So kind of covering the bases, and you'll hear some of those thoughts come out as we go through this presentation today. I'll hand it over to Angelo.
Thank you, Kameron. Hi, everybody. I'm much different from Kameron, but I think we tend to complement each other. The reason being, Kameron has spent almost his entire career with consulting, and I've spent very few total years in consulting. As a matter of fact, if we looked, the 30 plus years that I've been working in technology, the last 20 plus years, 15 years of them have been as a CIO, 7 years as a CEO. I've also taught at the master's level for the last 30 years. The perspective I'm going to try to bring is more of the buyer's perspective. So taking a look at maybe how it might be in your shoes, because I presume most of our viewership is going to be those who are buying solutions or trying to determine what's the best solution. So I'm going to try to help you out from that perspective, and Kameron's going to do a great job as always on the consulting side. Back to you, Kameron.
All right, excellent. All right, let's talk agenda here a little bit. So this agenda, Melissa, hopefully it was intriguing to understand snake bites and bee stings. I think the spirit of this agenda is meant to help understand what do we mean by snake bites. And as we lay out the success areas and think about those planks of success areas, we tried to categorize some of those most and more important activities into these basic success areas. So we've kind of taken a long list of things we've heard over the years in our experience and put those into these areas. And certainly when we talk about bee stings, ERP implementations are challenging. There's certainly many things that can go wrong, and there's some things that will go wrong during the time, and you got to manage those. But you want to make sure you get some big ticket items right, and that's the spirit of what we're going to talk about today. I do want to make a comment that myself and others in Avaap, we think in terms of full transformational life cycles, and not just the specific ERP implementation itself. So the start of a transformational life cycle is when a company starts to consider replacing their existing ERP systems. The end is really the system is enabling the transformational goals that you set out to do. The go live itself is a major milestone, but it's not the true end. So it really takes experience in that full life cycle journey to understand how you can transform your business in this ERP implementation journey. So that's the spirit of some of the points you'll hear on this discussion today too. We want this, when we go through these points here, we want this to be considered a kind of a checklist of suggestions and lessons learned. Some may be obvious to you because you've seen them before, and you're like, oh, you might roll your eyes and say that's totally obvious. But others may be something you didn't already know. But our take is that if you hear something, you learn something new, that's great. If you hear something, it gets validated, and that's, both of those are valuable. So hopefully you view it that way as well. I also want to say we had the pleasure of, Angelo and I attended a CIO Tomorrow event in Columbus in August this year. And one of the breakout sessions was the ERP journey and kind of a discussion on lessons learned and success. And I personally attended that specific breakout session. I took a lot of notes. There was 3 CIOs from Central Ohio that were there, and they shared their ideas and thoughts on success factors and lessons learned. So, add that to the background and credibility of this discussion, as well as Angelo's experience and my experience, and then the collective experience of Avaap.
And
Angelo,
Cameron,
yeah.
I was going to mention about the CIO Tomorrow event. I've attended it every year since its inception in 2002. And so that's a long time. And the topics that gets discussed there are usually top of mind for CIOs, but also for others within the organizations. And I don't think there's been a year gone by, at least within the last 15 years, that ERP hasn't been a topic of discussion. And now with cloud opportunities, that's been another hot item. So I'm not going to explain the whole CIO Tomorrow, but I did want to put in that plug. It's definitely a hot topic item within the entire spectrum of technology today.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks. And the last comment I'll make on this slide is the points and the thoughts we're going to share are independent of the specific cloud solution that we're talking about. So, when you think about the transformational journey of ERP, this can be applied to multiple specific solutions. Make sure that keep that in mind as we go through this. Okay, Vanessa, thanks. Now, before we dive into some of those success factors, we wanted to kind of bring to life a little bit when we say keep eyes wide open going into ERP implementation. Make sure you're mentally prepared and organizationally prepared for some of the challenges and risks. And frankly, this is just kind of a subset of some of those. And we invite people on the chat to just chime in with any other thoughts here. But we want to just paint this picture of they are tough transformations. They're hugely valuable, but they've got to be managed correctly. So, common challenges, if people aren't aligned around the objectives and the goals of why you're transforming, and replacing systems, and that's, that could be a challenge. Many times, and I think companies are getting better at this, but we have to reiterate that sometimes implementations are viewed as more of a technical solution instead of a functional business transformation. So there's a mindset shift that we have to get into. If the selection process wasn't terribly rigorous and disciplined, then you always plant the seeds of people questioning the solution that was selected, and you don't want that to impact your implementation. There's some planning activities we'll talk about in this, what we call phase 0, that help you get ready for when the gun goes off in implementation. You want to make sure you're positioned for that effectively. So you can see some of these other ones down here. Complex integrations. How clean is your data? Do you really know how clean your data is? Do you know the complexity of the migrations and conversions that you're going to need to have down the road? So those things will bite you for sure. Failure to plan for what does the operation look like after the implementation. If there's any stakeholder resistance, do you really know what that is? Is it easy to sniff out? So if that happens, and maybe there's a lot of projects and efforts going on at the organization, so there's a change fatigue that's going on across the organization. You want to understand if that's the case up front. So those are some things that can kind of derail you in a big way. And I just want to kind of paint that picture. So I don't know, Vanessa and Melissa, if there's any other in the chat we want to shout out and share before we dive into the meat of the agenda.
You would think after a year of trying to find the mute button, I'd be a little quicker with that, Kameron. But I think we're good to go. No questions have come in yet, but a good reminder for folks as they have them as you go through the session, put them in, and we'd love to, be able to incorporate people's feedback and interest as we move along. So back to you.
Okay.
I'm going to pick up from this point. Thank you, Kameron. Laying a solid foundation. The one benefit that you have is to take advantage of people who have done this. And that's been one of the great things of coming over to Avaap, working with people like Kameron, who have literally spent, tens of years doing this kind of thing day in and day out. So take advantage of that, and hopefully you will during this process. Now, we've outlined 3 things here that we feel are core in laying a solid foundation, which are really the keys to success when beginning your transformation journey. So number 1 is making sure that you have a system selection process. If the guy at the top or someone at the top already knows what the answer is, this process is not going to do you any good. Really, what this is meant to do is go through a step-by-step process to determine what is going to be the best system for you in your organization. So you need to make sure that you've got a respected and empowered selection team that's identified. You've got to make sure that we're clear on the governance on the final solution decision. So what is the process for getting to that decision? What are those selection requirements? How we will keep vendor scorecards, keep track of those vendors who we're going to look at, and keep track of who's doing a better job than the others. Also, along the way, we're going to develop business cases in order to make sure that this new ERP is going to meet the needs of our business. And we're also going to try to determine what are the total costs of ownership in order to have this system. Also, solution industry experience as a selection factor is also very key. So that's a key part of this process, is determining how we're going to select. And I know as an organization like ours, we come in and say that we're really not tied to any one system. What we try to do is work with organizations in order to make sure they're going to get what's best for them. Phase 0 activities, and that's something that we found a number of other organizations have coined that, but we use this concept to mean those things that could easily get very overlooked. So first of all, project management and governance, making sure that that's laid out. It's clearly defined as how we're going to govern this project. Also having a broad understanding of systems, interfaces, integrations, data, and reporting. It isn't just the system itself, the ERP system, that is going to be of consideration. It's all the integrations that it needs to interface with. It's all the conversions that need to occur. Those all need to be considered. Reporting has become so important. Just about everyone we work with today drives their business with data in some way. So that needs to be considered. You know, change management has become so important. I remember, you know, having been in the industry for over 30 years, that was something at the very beginning of our technology industry wasn't thought of very much. You know, would put a computer on someone's desk and expect them to know what to do. Today, we spend a lot of time trying to help people make sure that they're going to understand that new system, that new ERP system, and what's expected of them and working on it. And so to the business process alignment and making sure that that's in place.
Angelo?
Yes.
Angelo and I did a webinar on this a few months ago, so that we'd spent an hour just diving deep into phase 0, as well as a separate webinar on the process selection process. So there are a couple of boxes on the slide here, but there's certainly a lot of details and meat and potatoes behind this. I think on the phase 0, as I mentioned before, you know, when the gun goes off on implementation, you've got a pretty big team in place, your system integrator, your project management, your resources are in place, ready to go. So you want to make sure you're positioned best to use that time effectively. And that's the spirit of this phase 0, is getting some of those, long lead time items teed up, and back to the eyes wide open mantra. This helps you get your eyes open even wider before the implementation kicks off.
And that's a great point, Cameron. I think that we have both of those webinars and can make those available as well, Melissa, if I'm right, so that those folks maybe who are on this WebEx didn't have the opportunity to see those, they could bring them up. So we can readdress that after. But we do have those, right, Melissa?
Yeah.
I'm hearing yes. Okay.
Yeah.
The last point for laying the solid foundation is defining the organizational strategy. And I think this could be one of the most overlooked items, because really what we're trying to do is anticipate the future state requirements and try to establish, you know, a common view, a common set of beliefs within the team. You know, if you think about it, an ERP implementation can be so disruptive. Things are never going to be the same, so to speak. And trying to envision what things will look like in the future is so important, because this would mean trying to have key people who are going to be involved in the future state involved with the project. Also, the future role of those people may be different. So taking those things into consideration is very important. Also, summarizing the cloud transformation benefits. You know, it's a whole new ballgame today with ERP. Many of them are cloud-based, and it's become, you know, to most of our clients, very, very beneficial. So that's something to be considered as well. Define success measures. Hopefully you're doing that for all your projects, but this is particularly important here, to make sure that we know at the end that we're successful and why. And embrace solution vendors, repository of typical operational improvements, benefits collected across many other customers. So, you know, whether you're talking with an integrator like us or the actual ERP vendor, there's a lot of information available to you through them, where they can bring that to the table and share with you what's happened at other places, or perhaps other organizations within your industry or of similar size to you.
And Angelo, that's a benefit of a multi-cloud solution. multi-tenant cloud solution, because you've got a lot of customers using the exact same process and similar configuration. So the benefits can be collected across many companies and to be shown to the company who's implementing that solution as real examples of benefits that can be achieved. That's an important thing to understand.
Great point.
All right, Vanessa, thanks. So certainly a common theme is remembering the people on this journey. A couple buckets here is that organizational change management, peeling a little bit down into that, as well as making sure the project team is positioned. So certainly gaining executive sponsorship is important, and I think along with this comes teaching your sponsors how to be sponsors. What does it mean to be a sponsor? I think that's part of it as well. You can certainly ask someone to be a sponsor and they'll say, great, but you have to give them that definition and then lay it out for them. Change management plan, understanding that, how does the communication, the stakeholder assessment, the training, what's our approaches for that? And just lay that out from the very start so people are thinking about it throughout the entire transformational journey. It's not just at the end, or it's not just for training at the end. Conducting that stakeholder assessment. Do you understand who the stakeholders are? Do you really understand how each stakeholder group is positioned for success? And then communicating that change management need, the progress you want to maintain, communicate on a consistent basis. How are we doing working with our people and focusing on the people side of the change? Angelo mentioned the major role changes as early as possible, and this is one success factor, and that is when you have the organization's people involved with configuration sessions or process review sessions or even data review sessions, they're getting a taste of, in a sense, I have a sense my role is going to change pretty dramatically if we actually shift to some of the best practices with this solution. And so we might not know the exact specific details of the role change, but people are starting to kind of peel the onion on, I know my role is going to change in a big way, and I know that along the way that'll get more evolved and defined. And so getting that done, as early as possible kind of gets people that relief that, there will be a change in their role, but then it's going to be managed effectively. Change agent networks are a very common success factor where you want to bounce ideas, decisions, how to communicate decisions across the organization with people who are trusted and influential in the organization that can really kind of provide that guidance and then share it out. And that's been a very successful technique that we've used many times. And then, as I mentioned, setting stakeholder expectations. And again, stakeholders are not just internal stakeholders by functional group or business unit, but it could be vendors, can be customers. So there's a wide range of stakeholder groups to consider. On the project team side, you want to make sure, and some of these are kind of synergistic. You've got an empowered project team and define those roles effectively. One success is because this is such a transformational effort, you want to make sure identifying some of your strongest internal resources, by the various functions to participate in the organization. I mean, that's a painful thing to say, because you're taking people out of their day jobs, operational day jobs, and putting them on this major transformation. So you've got to be thinking about, are you willing to backfill the resources as needed for some of those day-to-day operations? That takes time to prepare, takes time to think about. It's a gut check on how ready your organization is ready to go on this, but it's important success factor. And then, the other thing is when you are pulling people out of the organization to focus on some of these a major role on the transformation, those resources will become future SMEs and leaders, have a great depth and breadth of knowledge of the system. And so they'll play key roles as the organization is forming after the implementation. And then finally, a mantra that I've used many times is you want to set up your project team so you don't rely on heroic efforts to be successful. You might have a heroic effort here and there for milestones, but not the overall success will not rely on a few people pulling rabbits out of their hat and making it happen. So no heroes mantra is something that I've used many times. I will hand it off to you, back to you, Angelo, for the next slide.
Thank you, Cameron. I want to spend a little time on project planning, management, and governance. And I think we're going to point out some changes that have occurred in the whole ERP business. The first one that I can recall, and if you worked on an ERP type project, it wasn't called ERP 30 years ago, but it was typically an HR, payroll, reporting type system, and it was usually a conglomeration. So it was a conglomeration of different applications, and many times we referred to it as very IT-driven type transformation or implementation. Today, just about every ERP implementation is it's business driven. And so the whole focus of it has completely changed from IT driven to business driven. That means, the business needs to be a bigger part of this process to make sure they're involved, they understand what's going on. The decision-making org structure clearly needs to be defined at the team level, the project management level, the sponsor level, the steering level. Cameron was half joking when he said about people needing to know what they have to do, especially at the sponsor and steering level. Well, that is so important. I remember starting a project where we wanted he was the controller to be the sponsor for the project, and it was going to have the blessing of the CFO. And the very first day, the controller said, I don't even know what I have to do. So you can't assume that not only the sponsor, but anyone on the team knows what they have to do. And that's so important. If everyone knows what they have to do, what their expectations are, then the job's going to get done the best. We need to formalize the issue and risk management. You don't want to deal with the same issue twice. That's the key thing. So using risk logs and having mitigating actions and doing it once is something that you ought to strive for. Keeping track of those, having like if an issue would come up and it came up before, being able to go to this log, doing a search and saying, oh, here's how we remedied it back then. So good old-fashioned project management. Also, the cloud will represent another change. The modern day ERP solutions, many of them have a cloud solution as part of it. So understanding how that solution contract tied to the cloud is clear, and how it's defined in the responsibilities between the solution vendor and the organization. So that becomes another element that we didn't have to deal with 30 years ago, but we believe that you'll be better in the long term, better served in the long term, having that cloud solution if you have an opportunity to implement that. Also, project documentation becomes critical. And that's always a tough thing, but keeping track of what's happened historically, having it be a repository of the project, being able to search that's so important, and making sure that key decisions are kept track of. Also, the key project team roles need to tie to a comprehensive work plan. We need to dedicate sufficient time for project planning. And, age old, I've always heard, oh, you should allocate 10%. Well, I think every organization's different. And, don't forget, you're not doing this project in a stovepipe kind of fashion where you're dealing with each department, usually, one at a time. Many times you're bringing together HR people, finance people, your analytic people, and many times actuaries if it's insurance. And so all of a sudden, you're dealing with a whole different crowd of people and needing to make sure that there's enough time allocated for the planning piece as well as the training and change piece. Phased implementation to demonstrate early successes and build momentum. I had the opportunity to run a company one time that was their focus, total agile application development. And, what that did all the time was get the business on board, because they were able to see results right away. And that's so important. And today, many of the, or most of the ERP implementations we're seeing are utilizing agile approaches and building momentum in that way. Understanding competing company-wide initiatives, that's going to have a major pull on your resources. If you're doing an ERP implementation at the same time, if there is an accounting project going on, that is something to be aware of, that is going to be of concern, to make sure that accounting department is not overwhelmed. Also, establishing a culture of accountability. That's where the project planning plays such a big role in the long run. And that's to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing, when it has to be done, and it's getting done.
Angelo, a quick comment on key decision structure and key decisions. When you think about some of the major decisions on the ERP implementation, there's pros and cons with the options you pick when you make a decision. So if you just document the decision itself, certainly that's helpful, but what's more important is documenting how you got to that decision. So it's laying out, here's the two options we considered, here's the pros and cons with each, here's the rationale for the decision, and here's who decided to move forward. Because people will second guess decisions sometimes, and someone will look at a decision in a vacuum and they'll say, well, there's a bunch of cons associated with that decision that was made. Well, yeah, there's cons to every option, but the other option had more negative and less positive. So it was picking the best one for the best option. So you got to put that into context. Otherwise, people can just cherry pick and say, well, why you obviously didn't think about this negative, aspect of that decision, when in fact you did, and you documented it, and then you can move forward and quiet the masses. And when people start second guessing decisions, that can derail the milestones. It can derail a lot of progress, and then all the milestones that back up behind it. So just having that process is so important in place for that decision making.
That's a great point, Kameron. Thank you.
Yeah.
We're coming up on another one of your favorites too, Kameron. Feel free to jump in, but embracing business processes. So process best practices included in the cloud solution configuration recipes. And I think you coined that term, Kameron, for recipes. The thing here is that the organizations that have done these things over and over and over, they have recipes. They can pull out of their historic documentation how others have done this. Make good use of that, particularly in defining your business processes. Also, understand what organizational processes are truly unique and differentiators versus best or common practice, which is good enough. And that is something that is many times difficult to do. Also, include enough process stakeholders and subject matter experts in the configuration sessions to get a wide range of people being part of the solution. Here again, years ago, and really not all that many years ago, we were doing all this through programming, and many times would have a room full of people and figure out how we're going to code this thing. Well, today, many of these ERP systems are configurable. And so there are configuration sessions you'll go through with the vendor, and sitting down to understand what those are, and making sure that you have the say of a number of different people from within the organization, so that it's not viewed totally as someone who has the healthcare management piece of the company versus the accounting piece of it takes a true balance to configure these systems.
Yeah, Angela, I'll add that I think the organizations will be surprised maybe to find out that most of their business processes can be handled by a best practice recipe, and a smaller portion of those business processes have to be unique and different because they're strategic differentiators for the company. We're talking about financial processes, HR processes, supply chain, some cases student in the higher education industry. And a lot of those are standard processes. So really getting to the heart of which ones truly need to be unique, because you're going to spend more time on those from a configuration and maybe some some more detailed configuration activity. So a lot of companies will start with, please tell us why the best practice won't work for us. With all those stakeholders in the room, why won't this work? And then the company has to be ready to say, well, it's a differentiator for us and it's got to be different. So there's a factor in the equation there of thinking about, pushing on your organization to be more consistent with the best practices.
Yep. The devil truly is in the details, and I want to focus on a few areas where that's particularly so, and that's with testing, training, and data. From a data perspective, understanding data, the degree of data integrity and cleanliness as early as possible is so important. I used to always view an implementation of a major system such as an ERP as a new beginning for the organization. Things are going to be done differently. We're going to have different responsibilities. We're going to have different workflows. And that startup, I've always wanted to be as smooth and perfect as possible. Understanding the data that you've got to feed into that system, especially to get it started, but then also ongoing, is so important. There's nothing worse than, buying or half creating and buying a new system like this, only to convert in data that is clunky and has problems. So it's so important to do an analysis, make sure you know what kind of data you're getting, purify it before you get the process going. Data definitions and governance, having a clear understanding of the source of truth and key business data. I can't tell you how many arguments I've sat through where the sales guy thought that he had a great month and the accounting person thought that sales had a terrible month. So making sure that everybody is on the same page. And, today, BI has become so important to most organizations, analytics, and this is just something that has to be focused upon. And I think some organizations are getting there, but I still hear those horror stories where different parts of the organization are not in sync with the data. Here's a great chance to make sure that they are. Also, what tool sets are you going to use for your BI and DA tools? What capabilities will enable the decision making? Are you going to use scorecards, dashboards? What are you going to do? So there's a lot of decisioning that needs to get made there. On the testing side, user acceptance tests based on documented requirements are important. One of the big mistakes some organizations will make is to just have the vendors come in and do demos. What I always like to do is sort of create a documented set of requirements with business cases that the vendors will come in and work against, so that I can see if I have 3 finalist vendors, I can see how they all compare to each other using the same requirements, as not using what they want to see, but what I need to see in running the business. Also, invest and use a leading test tool to organize user acceptance testing. It's going to be well worth your while to do that. And remember, it's good old systems 101. You got to be able to do unit testing, systems testing, some amount of performance testing, parallel testing. Keep that in mind, keep that in consideration. Training, a combination of role-based training and business process training for each role is important in order to see the bigger picture. Training is a great opportunity. I really believe that any major systems change, the biggest risk we run are with the people. It's so important that they get it. It's so important they understand. So making sure that we're prepared to train our folks so that they can use the system as best they can. And that's going to increase our opportunity for success if we do that. Also, making sure there's multiple methods of training. We now get it that not all people can understand their training in the same way. So making sure that there are job aids, that there are recordings, that people can go online and use job aids or use references. So we have that opportunity today. I remember, the days of treating folks like as it was we were in just one big classroom. Today we can vary that, and some people learn in different ways. We need to keep that in mind. Also, consider compliance requirements and security design, how important that is today. I remember we used to have an old saying of, involve the auditor up front so that, they don't tell you what's wrong at the end. So that's something to consider, is in a project like this, people with the security knowledge, the compliance knowledge, that they're involved. I think,
Angelo,
yeah.
if you're done, I've got a couple comments.
I was going to add some, but go ahead.
Sure. Back to the converted data, when you look at that point, use converted data, you might be thinking, well, it seems like a no-brainer, you would do that. But when you think about it, there's a cost to that and there's an effort to that. And you want to use converted data during your acceptance testing, because that completes the cycle of what it's going to look like when you go live. And from my experience, it takes an extra effort to do that, because if you try to use converted data and then you have test plans ready to go and test scripts to run through, if you don't successfully get the data converted initially, then you're delaying the acceptance test scripts, and it's a pain factor. Then now you're getting behind on testing. So you want to, upfront say to yourself, the right way to make sure we have integrity in our testing is to include converted test data, but there is a cost to that, and there's a planning that has to go to it. And that's why we kind of bring this up here, that can bite you, because you can do all the testing you want. Then when you actually convert the data, now you've got a disconnect between that converted data and the testing that was successful. And I've seen that, burn people in the past. So be thinking about that collectively. The other point I'll make is on the training for adoption, that role-based training and business process training. Certainly we all think in terms of, depth of role-based training, and that's something you have to do. But you want to make sure also you're giving your people an understanding of how they're impacting the downstream and how the upstream is impacting them within the context of that business process. So just understanding what that one person does in that one role is not just enough. So it takes a little extra time to think about, how do you train that person to understand what they're doing successfully now is going to impact somebody down the road. Or if I'm in a role that maybe doesn't change very much and my job is pretty consistent, and I'm thinking, hey, the ERP system hasn't helped me, but what I'm doing is actually helping somebody down the stream of the process. So I should feel good about that and understand that they're benefiting from my actions. So there's really a picture of role and process view that we need people to have going into the, coming out of the implementation.
Kameron, I'll add that other piece. That's fantastic, but I'll just say one thing, and then we can go on to, I think, one of your last pieces. But the thing that we are going to need, we are going to get taxed, we are going to get challenged by a major system implementation like this, from the selection process all the way through to the implementation, because we need both a depth of company knowledge and experience. So that's going to include vision, current process, current environment, key requirements, but also needing experience in implementing ERP systems, the project management, the comprehensive planning, configuration and technical knowledge of the new system, change management, and comprehensive testing. So it's really going to push us. It's going to be important to employ proven tools and templates and methods for implementation. I think it's practically crazy not to go at this with somebody who's done it before. So, Kameron?
Yep, sounds good. Okay, so this is the last slide before we get into some Q&A, and looking forward to any discussion we can have. I think, the spirit of hearing messages multiple times to drive them home, you can see that, some of the key takeaway messages, really opening your eyes up to some of the known challenges and risks going into implementation are very helpful, and have the dialogue with the project team and with the project leaders is extremely helpful. And hopefully you've got some takeaways on, what are some of those things to keep in mind. And then, laying the solid foundation, making sure that the solution is selected with the right rigor and process. And, any pre-implementation activities are being considered just to expand the understanding of the major undertaking that's going to occur. And then remembering the people, hopefully hear that message a few different times. Start, one of the things I heard at the CIO tomorrow breakout session was change management needs to start when you start thinking about the ERP system, and change management continues on well after go live into the kind of post-implementation support. So it really is a full change management journey support that has to be considered. You're planning for success, you got to get the governance, decision-making, those business processes in place, as we said. And then there are some areas where the devil's in the details. I mean, there's certainly a lot of details in an implementation project, but we try to highlight some of the ones that are the snake bites, frankly. The testing, we talked about the training, security, some of those things to really be thinking about. And as Angelo said, partnering with an expert to someone who's kind of been broadly and deeply down that path multiple times with different organizations is certainly helpful in bringing the tools and templates. But the value of the project team the organization's project team knowledge of the culture, knowledge of how things get done, knowledge of the unique processes, those obviously are extremely important to bring to the table. So both parties are important. So that's my way of saying exactly what Angelo just said in the previous slide, but just reiterating that again as we go through some of these key takeaways. And then I'm going to leave with a quick story that I think is relevant to this, and just something you can, just for fun. It's fun for me, certainly, but the building of the Panama Canal is fascinating if people haven't known that or understand the details of that. But there's a book called Path Between the Seas by David McCullough. He's a pretty famous historical writer. And, one of the points of the book was, for in the 1800s, late 1800s, the French and others tried to, make progress on completing the Panama Canal, and really didn't have much success. Some of it was, industry and equipment in the times, but it was just, there's a lot to overcome. The United States took over the project in 1904. A guy named Wallace took over, and he was pressured by the governing committee to just keep digging and just keep making progress day after day. And he kind of ignored some of the infrastructure that was there was not quite set up to accommodate so many people and the transportation and the different methods. And really, it just didn't go very well. So Wallace was replaced. He resigned after a year. And a guy named John Stevens, who you might recognize he was one of the guys who was the engineer who oversaw the program of the U.S. railroads. But he was brought in to take over the project. And he basically went to the ICC commission, which is governing the Panama Canal, and said, we're not going to dig for about a year. And they're like, what are you talking about? We're not going to dig for a year. He said, we're going to focus on infrastructure for the next year and a half. Hotels, hospitals, water systems, repair shops, housing, warehouses, worker safety, understand why malaria is so devastating to the people, really get to the bottom of that disease. So he kept getting pressured to dig, and he said, we need to get the barriers to success out of the way first. And he defined what those were. And in the end, John Stevens was the guy credited with taking the Panama Canal to the foundation for a successful completion of that. There's other guys after him that came in and did some things, but John Stevens was a guy who recognized that you've got to clear the barriers, understand the risk, and attack those, and that just lays the foundation for success. In that respect, it's very similar to an ERP journey. I don't ever want to think that a ERP implementation is quite as complex as a Panama Canal building, but I think you appreciate the analogy. So I'll leave you with that. Hopefully people get a chance to check out that book. It's fantastic. It's well written and it's very informative. So thanks. Back to you, Vanessa and Melissa.
All right. That was a great session and a great story. Very relevant example on eliminating barriers to success. So very, very good mindfulness to leave this group with. Thank you again for the great presentation. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We'll be sure to get a recording out in the prior sessions to all who asked. Go ahead, like we said, drop your questions in, whether it's in the chat or the Q&A window. Before we get to them, I just want to quickly remind you that if you're interested in learning more about how Avaap can support your transformation journey, you're welcome to send Kameron, Angelo, or me an email. If you want to send it to me, you can send it at info@avaap.com, and I'll be sure to forward it on to the right team member. I also want to remind you at the end, there's a short survey. I set a goal on the last session to get to 100% response. We were shy of that, but I'm committed to hitting it again. Appreciate your input, and if you can just take that less than a minute survey, we'd appreciate it. As many of you know, Avaap is an industry-focused management and technology consulting firm specializing in enterprise solutions, data analytics, and change management. Our name is an imagined word reflective of the 5 essential elements: fire, wind, sky, water, and earth, and aligned to the values of which we operate. Hopefully Angelo and Kameron left you with a good idea of our team's deep expertise in ERP cloud implementations and our unbiased objective advisory services. So, before we get to the questions, I want to touch on something. Kameron, Angelo, you can decide who answers this, but, Kameron, you mentioned about change management and talking about, even putting it in during that, implementation selection process. A lot of times, we hear that, folks are saying, let's get closer to go live to see how much change management we need. You talked about eliminating barriers to success and being mindful upfront. So how can someone build the business case and get support for including change management in the planning phase?
I think that if you consider people, and I think that's what it comes down to. Many times it's the people aspect that gets left out of the ROI equations, right? We're not always looking at how much better, quicker, faster, and with more confidence our people are going to be able to do their work. If that is considered as within the ROI as well, I think then it's a different ballgame. What I've seen with an ERP, because it's many times involving multiple departments, is that not everyone is in sync. So there's going to need to be a lot more orchestration amongst the people within the company in order to make sure that we're more productive than we were before the change. And, the company more than likely before the change was operated by department, whereas now you're going to see a lot more uniformity, people having to work together, the accounting people working more closely with other departments such as HR. And that's the thing that I saw happen. And if you consider that aspect and really try to do an ROI to include the people aspect, then you'll be able to come up with a justification for change management or OCM.
I would add to that when you think about cloud solutions these days, they're less about the technical work because they're hosted solutions, and they're much more about adopting the processes and the people to those solutions. And so, the emphasis becomes on, how the processes change, then how do the people within those processes change? So the business case becomes, telling the executive management, you realize that a lot of organizational not the structure, but the roles will change for our people. So that's the meat and potatoes of making sure this project is successful. So then that leads to the question of, well, how do you do that? And you start backing up into as Angelo said, stakeholder groups, who needs to be trained, different roles change, all those things. And that just becomes a big factor. And it just, the basics of the nature of a cloud solution just dictates that reality these days.
Yeah, for sure. Those are good points. Remembering the people and being strategic and how you bring people along. Very, very important. As you mentioned, cloud is different, so this is a question that came in, and it does, speak to the differences in cloud versus those traditional on-premise implementation of the past. Are project roles, responsibilities between the organization and the SI typically clear? So again, I don't know, Kameron, Angelo, if who wants to address it, but the question is, are project roles and responsibilities between the organization and the system implementer typically clear?
I think solution vendors do a really great job of drawing a line between what is the key activities they're responsible for and what are the key activities the organization is responsible for. I mean, certainly, understanding the data, the configuration, different business processes, the solution vendor will bring that to the table. They know how to kind of manage that. But in terms of sometimes, data cleanliness and the testing and really the people side of change, sometimes they draw a line with that's the responsibility of the company that's implementing the ERP solution. So I'm pretty confident that line gets drawn pretty clearly when you think about all the different project roles. And then one thing we run into sometimes as a consultant organization is, the client understands their responsibilities, but they don't necessarily know how to do all those responsibilities. They don't understand maybe how to organize testing or organize the data conversion or some of the analytics or even some of the change management. So they might need, what we call is, kind of client side support during that implementation. So in that respect, we understand how to be, SIs, the system integrators, as well as kind of that client side support. So we can kind of dial up and down, what is needed for that specific ERP implementation, depending on the needs of the client.
Excellent. A lot of times during these transformation projects, there's so much intensity and energy on getting to go live that it seems that there's that's where the focus sometimes is on getting to go live. I was on the phone yesterday with one of our higher education CIO customers, and he said during the conversation, the go live is just the beginning. So, when you think of transformation, it really does extend to that ongoing value. Thinking about those post go live activities, which ones are important? What activities are important to consider post go live?
That is so important what this gentleman said, because we all think, those of us that have been part of a major systems development and implementation, we think of the work we're doing during that time as so important, but we haven't yet even begun to generate revenue or generate solution until we go live with that system. And on that day, that becomes the first day of benefit for that new system. So what that and I know I thought about that, and it was a business guy, it was a vice president at a bank that told me that, and I thought, oh my gosh. And this was 25 years ago, and that makes so much sense. And particularly if you look at it financially, I do think that cutover, which occurs at that exact minute where you go to the new system, is the most important part, and making sure that people are prepared for that. There more than likely will be some issues, and so making sure the team can handle those issues and move forward. But that's what comes to my mind right away is the cutover. It's always usually difficult.
And I'd add to that, just think about the solution vendor that's been selected as part of the selection process. One of the questions you're going to ask is, how is that solution vendor growing their product? learning from other customers, baking that into their solution. What is, some of the research user groups, are they evolving it? And so, after go live, you've certainly implemented to a point where you want to, stabilize what you've implemented. There's probably some hypercare right at, a few months afterwards, but then you start to understand that you're riding a little bit of a wave with that solution vendor as your, key partner. As they evolve and grow, you're getting the benefit of those improvements as well. So you got to be able to manage those additional releases and you take things from there. Plus, you've got a team in place that understands the solution pretty well, and they're in a good position to, have some Kaizen sessions and think about some continuous improvement ideas to feed back up to the organization or to the solution vendor. So I like how you said that. It's just the beginning. That is true, and that's the spirit of what we're saying. Is ERP is the catalyst for a transformational journey, for sure, which doesn't just end at the at the go live.
Yeah. So, we are at the top of the hour. For everyone on today's call, again, great big thank you. We appreciate your sharing your day, regardless of where you are in your journey. Don't go it alone. As we said earlier, if you need help, we've got Angelo and Kameron's contact details up on the screen. When we hit end webinar, there is a brief survey. One of the questions is topics that you want to hear more about in the future. We'd love to create a session that's meaningful to you, that provides value and gives you the information you need. Of course, if you want more information, visit us on avaap.com. Reach out to me, Angelo, Kameron. Again, thank you so much. You will get a copy of today's presentation. You'll get a copy of those additional sessions that we put on. I hope you have a fabulous Wednesday afternoon, great rest of the week, and we will see you next time. Kameron, Angelo, thanks again for sharing your knowledge and insight with us. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to doing this again sometime in the next few weeks.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Bye,
very
everyone.
much.
For joining.